She was kicked off a flight for inappropriate clothing, an act that humiliated her in front of thousands. But what the airline didn't know was that this moment would be the spark that ignited one of the most unexpected revolutions in fashion. What happened next will shock you and change the way you see the power of standing up for yourself. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. Lena had always been different. At 17, she was already known in her small town for her daring fashion choices. She wasn't like the other girls who followed the latest trends. Lena made her own rules. Today she was wearing an oversized vintage t-shirt that read, "Rebel Without a Cause," paired with ripped jeans and chunky sneakers. Her look was loud, unapologetic, and full of attitude, exactly the way she wanted to be seen. She was on her way to New York, excited for the opportunity of a lifetime. The fashion world, with its endless possibilities, was calling her name. It wasn't just about the clothes. It was about self-expression, about showing the world who she was, without saying a word. The airport was crowded, a mix of tired travelers and busy employees. Lena stood in line at security, her heart racing with the excitement of the day ahead. She couldn't wait to get on that plane and make her mark in the city that never slept. But as she made her way to the boarding gate, something happened that she wasn't prepared for. A flight attendant, tall and sharp, blocked her way. Lena's first instinct was to smile, but the woman didn't return it. Instead, she looked at Lena with a mixture of disbelief and judgment. "You can't board in that," the flight attendant said, her voice cold. Lena's smile dropped. She glanced at her outfit, trying to understand what could be wrong with it. She wasn't breaking any rules. Her clothes were comfortable and stylish. What was the problem? The woman, who Lena would later learn was named Samantha, folded her arms across her chest. "You need to change into something more appropriate," Samantha continued, her tone now even sterner. Lena felt a sudden heat rise to her cheeks. She'd been through enough judgmental stares to know what this was about. Samantha wasn't talking about comfort or safety. She was talking about conformity, about fitting into a mold that Lena wasn't interested in being part of. Lena's heart pounded in her chest. "What's wrong with my clothes?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Samantha's eyes narrowed. "Airline policy," she said sharply, glancing at the other passengers who were beginning to notice the exchange. "You can't board in casual clothes like that. It's disrespectful to the airline and to other passengers." Lena's hands clenched at her sides. She couldn't believe this was happening. She had flown before, in much the same outfit, and never had anyone said a word. She wasn't some troublemaker, just a teenager trying to live her life on her own terms. But today, she wasn't going to let this woman make her feel small. "I'm fine. I've flown before in clothes like these. There's nothing wrong with them," she snapped, her voice rising in frustration. Samantha's response was swift and cold. "I'm going to have to call security." The words felt like a slap in the face. Lena's chest tightened. She wasn't going to let this happen. She had too much riding on this flight. This wasn't just any trip. She had a chance to make a name for herself in the fashion world. New York could be her big break. But all of that felt distant now. In that moment, it was just her, standing there in front of an authority figure who thought she had no place on the plane. As Samantha stepped away to speak into her radio, Lena felt a surge of humiliation wash over her. She had heard stories of people getting kicked off flights for ridiculous reasons, but she never thought it would happen to her. She didn't fit the mold, and now she was paying the price for it. Seconds later, 2 security officers arrived, their eyes scanning Lena's outfit as if it were some kind of crime scene. They didn't say much, but the look they gave her told her everything she needed to know. She wasn't welcome. "Ma'am, you're going to have to step off the plane," one of them said flatly, as if there was no room for discussion. Lena opened her mouth to protest, but nothing came out. She felt the anger rising inside her, but there was nothing she could do. She was being kicked off the plane because of what she was wearing. She turned to see the passengers behind her, many of whom had started whispering and pointing. The murmurs were getting louder. Lena's cheeks burned. She felt small. All her confidence, all her dreams of making it in the fashion world, felt like they were slipping through her fingers. Samantha was watching from the doorway of the plane, her face expressionless. It was clear she wasn't going to back down. Lena couldn't believe it. The humiliation was crushing, but she wasn't going to let it break her. With her head held high, Lena walked down the ramp, the sound of her sneakers clicking on the hard concrete, the weight of the stairs on her back. When the door to the plane closed behind her, she felt an odd mixture of anger and defeat. She had fought for her right to wear what she wanted, and now she was standing in an empty airport, her future slipping away. But as she stood there, staring at the plane taking off without her, something in her snapped. This wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. She would make them regret this. She would show the world that being different was something to be proud of. In that moment, Lena swore to herself that she would fight for what she believed in, and she would do it on her own terms. She didn't know how, but she would make them see that she belonged. 2 years passed. Time had a way of erasing the sharp sting of the past, but it never fully healed the wound Lena had felt when she was kicked off that plane. New York, the city that had once seemed like a distant dream, was now her reality. She turned that moment of humiliation into fuel, using it to push herself harder, to prove that being different was her greatest strength. Lena had built a name for herself. She wasn't just another teen influencer, posting selfies and sponsored content. No, she was a force to be reckoned with in the world of fashion. Her Instagram was a gallery of self-expression, showcasing bold, unconventional outfits that turned heads. Her followers, many of them teenagers and young adults like her, saw Lena as a symbol of rebellion against the rigid cookie-cutter standards of the fashion industry. Her message was simple. Wear what makes you feel powerful, not what the world tells you to wear. It wasn't all smooth sailing, though. For every adoring fan, there was a critic. Her inbox was filled with messages, some positive, some harsh. What were you thinking with that outfit? You look like a mess. Fashion should be about class, not chaos. But Lena had learned to ignore the hate. The messages only fueled her fire. She wasn't here to make everyone happy. She was here to change the game. And change it she did. Lena's career skyrocketed after she teamed up with a startup fashion brand that embraced her vision of inclusivity. The brand was all about breaking barriers, and it quickly gained traction. Lena was the face of their first major campaign, promoting body-positive and gender-neutral clothing. For once, she wasn't just a girl in clothes. She was a voice. She wasn't just a product of the fashion industry. She was reshaping it. Her rise to fame wasn't all glamorous, though. Behind the scenes, she worked tirelessly, designing new collections, meeting with designers, negotiating deals. There were sleepless nights, stressful days, and moments of doubt. But she always returned to the same core belief. Fashion was about freedom, about owning who you were, no matter what anyone else thought. One afternoon, as Lena was scrolling through her phone, she received an email that made her pause. It was from a large, well-known airline, the one that had kicked her off 2 years ago. They were launching a campaign to revamp their brand, and they wanted her on board. Lena laughed out loud, shaking her head in disbelief. She read the email again to make sure she hadn't misread it. The airline was inviting her to become their fashion consultant, to help them rebrand and modernize their image. They wanted her to come up with new uniform designs, rethink their dress code policies, and bring a fresh, inclusive vision to the company. It was ironic, it was perfect, and it was her chance to make a real impact in the industry. Without hesitation, Lena replied, saying she was interested. She had no idea where this would lead, but she knew one thing: she wasn't going to let her past define her. She would take this opportunity to turn the tables and show them that she wasn't the girl they kicked off the plane anymore. A week later, Lena was sitting in a sleek, modern conference room, surrounded by executives, marketing experts, and fashion designers. The room was full of energy, but Lena felt the weight of history hanging in the air. This was the same airline that had humiliated her, the same airline that had told her she didn't belong. The head of marketing, a polished man in his 40s, smiled as he introduced Lena. "We're so excited to have you here," he said, extending his hand. "Your vision and your influence are exactly what we need to shake things up." Lena shook his hand, her mind racing. She was here. She was going to change everything. They showed her the airline's current uniforms, and Lena's face twitched with a slight frown. The designs were stiff and outdated, a far cry from what she imagined could represent the spirit of modern travel. "We need something that speaks to today's traveler," the marketing head continued. "Something bold, fresh, and inclusive, and we believe you're the right person to help us get there." Lena glanced at the designs again, mentally rejecting the traditional stifling designs in front of her. She was ready for this, ready to rewrite the rules, ready to show them how fashion could be both practical and a statement. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady but filled with confidence. Little did she know this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be full of obstacles, some she never expected, and among them, she would meet someone who had already been there before, someone whose views on fashion and professionalism had clashed with hers in ways that would test her, in ways she couldn't imagine. But for now, Lena was focused. She had a job to do, and she was determined to do it on her own terms. She was about to shake up the airline industry in a way that no one saw coming. Lena arrived at the airline's headquarters the next day, a sleek glass building towering over her, a symbol of the corporate world that had once seemed so out of reach. She entered the lobby with a mixture of excitement and nervousness swirling inside her. As she waited for her meeting to begin, she couldn't help but think about how far she'd come in 2 years. No longer the girl who'd been tossed off a plane for wearing the wrong clothes, but a rising star in the fashion world. Her phone buzzed with messages from her fans wishing her luck. "You're going to blow them away, Lena," one said. Another read, "This is your moment, show them who you are." But despite the support, a part of her still couldn't shake the memory of that humiliating day. The thought of being back in the same airline office was like a twist of fate, reminding her of how everything had started. The doors to the conference room opened, and a sharp, professional woman in her 30s walked in. Her high heels clicked against the marble floor as she gave Lena a warm smile. "Hi, Lena, I'm Rachel, head of HR. We've been really looking forward to meeting you." Lena shook Rachel's hand, smiling back. "Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here." Rachel motioned for her to take a seat at the long conference table. The room was sleek, full of glass walls and polished wood. It had an air of authority, but Lena wasn't intimidated. She had a vision, and she was ready to share it. She pulled out her tablet and began flipping through her designs, giving Rachel a glimpse of her ideas for the airline's rebranding. But as the conversation started, Lena's mind kept drifting. Something felt off. Something in the air was familiar. But she couldn't put her finger on it. Then it hit her. When the door opened again, a figure entered that froze Lena in place. It was Samantha, the same flight attendant from 2 years ago. The woman who had kicked her off that plane. She walked in with a confident stride, her sharp blue uniform matching the professionalism of the room, but her expression was unreadable. Lena's stomach churned. She had hoped, no, prayed, that she wouldn't see her here. This was supposed to be her fresh start, a chance to prove herself in a whole new arena. But now, here was the one person who had tried to crush her dreams. Samantha didn't seem to notice Lena immediately. She was deep in conversation with the executives, her back turned as she discussed something in earnest. But Lena was already aware of the tension building in the room. She was acutely aware of every breath, every shift in posture. Rachel turned to Lena, breaking the silence. "Lena, I'd like you to meet Samantha. She's our new head of customer experience. She'll be working alongside you on the redesign of the uniforms and brand image." Lena's pulse quickened. Head of customer experience? So Samantha had been promoted. Lena forced a smile, though the feeling in her gut was far from pleasant. Samantha was now one of the decision-makers. A part of her wanted to speak up, to remind Samantha of what had happened 2 years ago. But she knew better than that. This was business. She couldn't let the past dictate her future. Samantha turned around, her eyes locking with Lena's. There was a brief flicker of recognition before her professional mask slipped back into place. She offered a stiff handshake. "Lena," she said, her voice flat. "It's good to see you again." Lena didn't know how to respond. "You too," she said, forcing the words out. Her mind was racing. The last time they had met, it had been in front of a crowd with her pride shattered. Now they were supposed to work together. Lena tried to suppress the anger that bubbled up inside her. This was her chance to prove she belonged. Samantha gave a curt nod and took her seat at the table. The meeting began, but Lena couldn't focus on the details. She kept glancing at Samantha, wondering what she was really thinking. Had she changed? Or was she still the same person who had called security 2 years ago? The executives began to discuss their vision for the new airline image, but all Lena could think about was the way Samantha sat there, so composed, like nothing had ever happened. Was it possible that she didn't remember the humiliation? Or worse, maybe she didn't care. The hours stretched on, and Lena's mind wandered. She could feel the walls closing in. She didn't want to let this uncomfortable tension affect her work, but she couldn't help it. Every time Samantha spoke, it reminded Lena of how powerless she had felt back then. At the end of the meeting, as everyone stood up, Rachel turned to Lena. "We're thrilled to have you on board. Your ideas are fresh, exciting, and exactly what this airline needs." Lena nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She had a plan. She couldn't let Samantha, couldn't let anyone distract her from her mission. The past was the past, and today was about change. She had the chance to do what she had always dreamed of, to redefine the rules of fashion, to prove that individuality was something to be celebrated, not shamed. But there was a part of her that couldn't shake the feeling that Samantha's presence here wasn't just a coincidence. As she walked out of the room, Lena's gaze flickered to Samantha, who was still engaged in conversation with the other executives. Their eyes met briefly, and Lena couldn't tell if it was a challenge or a silent acknowledgement. Either way, she was determined. She would make sure this time, she would be the one in control. Tomorrow, she would start designing the new uniforms, but today, she was already fighting for her place. The next few days at the airline were a blur for Lena. She spent her time working with the design team, brainstorming new ideas for uniforms, looking through fabric swatches, and sketching her concepts. It was everything she had dreamed of, creating something fresh, something that screamed individuality, yet still fit within the scope of the airline's needs. But despite the excitement of her work, there was always a shadow lurking in the background. Samantha. Every time they crossed paths, Lena couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Samantha never overtly challenged her, but the tension between them was palpable. Samantha's sharp, professional exterior didn't hide the disapproval that occasionally flashed in her eyes when Lena presented her bold designs. Lena could feel it. The old energy was still there, the same energy from 2 years ago when Samantha had decided that Lena wasn't fit to be on that plane. Lena tried to keep her focus on the work, but every time she saw Samantha, it was like an unspoken challenge. Was Samantha really on her side? Or was she just here to make sure Lena's ideas stayed within the boundaries of tradition and professionalism? Lena had no intention of backing down. She'd worked too hard, fought too many battles to let someone, anyone, hold her back. The worst part was the subtle way Samantha used her authority. In the meetings, Samantha would quietly disagree with Lena's ideas, often suggesting more conservative, safer alternatives. A button-up shirt here, a tailored blazer there. Things Lena had no interest in. She wanted to push the envelope. She wanted to create uniforms that didn't just blend in but stood out. She wanted them to speak to the younger generation, dynamic, comfortable, stylish. Something that said, "We're not just a service, we're a reflection of who you are." But whenever she pushed the envelope, Samantha would play the role of the realist, asking, "Do you think this will be acceptable to all passengers? Or, can we ensure this won't come off as unprofessional?" Those questions always seemed to hit the mark, and Lena would pause, second-guessing herself, even though she knew deep down that she wasn't creating anything outrageous. But the pressure was there, the subtle reminder that change wasn't easy. And sometimes, it felt like Samantha was holding the reins, waiting for Lena to trip up. One afternoon, as Lena was about to leave for the day, she ran into Samantha in the hallway. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence was thick, the kind that made everything feel heavy. Samantha finally broke the silence, her voice a little softer than usual. "You've been doing great work, Lena," she said, her tone almost kind. Lena wasn't sure. It was hard to tell if it was genuine or just the veneer of politeness that had become second nature to Samantha. Lena forced a smile, still on edge. "Thanks. I'm glad you think so." Samantha hesitated before speaking again, almost as if she were searching for the right words. "I know we haven't always seen eye to eye," she said, her voice quieter now, almost reflective. "But I respect your vision. You've got guts, Lena." Lena's eyebrows furrowed. This was a shift. 2 years ago, Samantha had thrown her off the plane for daring to show up as herself. And now she was telling her she had guts? The sudden change was confusing. Was this some kind of manipulation? Or was Samantha actually trying to bridge the gap between them? Before Lena could respond, the conversation was interrupted by a call from one of the designers. Samantha's eyes flickered toward the source of the interruption, then back to Lena. "We'll talk later," she said, and without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away, leaving Lena standing there, unsure of what had just happened. That night, Lena couldn't stop thinking about it. Was Samantha sincere? Or was this just another attempt to keep her in check? There were too many mixed signals. One moment, Samantha was treating her like an equal. The next, she was subtly undermining her work. The push and pull was maddening. The next morning, Lena presented the final version of the uniforms to the executives. Her designs were a bold mix of comfort and style. Oversized blazers, sleek pants, stylish sneakers, and unisex options. She wanted the uniform to speak to the diversity and individuality of the passengers, not just the professionalism of the airline. It was fresh, forward-thinking, and exactly what the company needed to appeal to a younger audience. As she spoke, explaining her choices, she couldn't help but notice the way Samantha's eyes were fixed on her. There was no praise, no smile. Just that same critical gaze, the one Lena had seen when they first met. When the presentation ended, there was a pause, and everyone looked at Samantha for her feedback. Lena held her breath, waiting. It was in this moment that she knew she was either going to make history or be shut down completely. Samantha leaned forward, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. "These are bold," she began, her voice measured, almost clinical. "But I'm not sure if they're quite ready for the airline industry. They're edgy, but will they be practical for all of our flight attendants, pilots and passengers?" Lena's heart sank. It was the same old line, the same hesitation, the same desire to keep things safe. Lena's hands gripped the edge of the table, but she held herself together. She wasn't about to back down now. Not after everything she'd worked for. "I don't think fashion has to be practical in the traditional sense," Lena replied, her voice steady. "I think it should empower people. It should make them feel comfortable, yes, but also confident. We're not just an airline, we're a brand that should reflect the diverse, modern world we live in." There was a long pause. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Samantha's eyes locked onto Lena's. For a moment, it seemed like she was about to say something more, but instead, she simply nodded. "We'll take this into consideration," she said, her tone neutral. The executives seemed to agree, but Lena couldn't shake the feeling that Samantha was holding something back. She didn't know what it was, but she knew one thing for sure. The stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about uniforms anymore. This was about power. About who would shape the future of this airline. And it wasn't just Samantha she had to worry about. It was the entire system. The same system that had thrown her off that plane, the same one that would try to keep things the way they had always been. Lena wasn't going to let that happen, not now, not ever. As the weeks went by, Lena found herself at the center of a growing storm. The pressure from both inside the company and out seemed to intensify. On one hand, the executives were praising her creativity, telling her that her ideas were exactly what the airline needed to modernize and attract a younger, more diverse clientele. But on the other hand, the pushback from Samantha and a few of the older, more conservative members of the team was palpable. Every time Lena presented a new concept or design, Samantha seemed to find a reason to challenge it, often with the same question: is this truly appropriate for all passengers? The line between creativity and practicality was becoming more and more blurred, and the constant back and forth was starting to wear on Lena. She'd always been confident in her vision, but now, as the weeks dragged on, doubt began to creep in. Was she pushing too far? Was she alienating too many of the airline's loyal customers who preferred tradition? One particularly tense meeting left Lena feeling more disillusioned than ever. The marketing team had suggested adding a new logo design to the uniforms to give them a more premium feel, but Lena hated the idea. It was too corporate, too generic, and completely at odds with the individuality she was trying to inject into the brand. As she voiced her concerns, Samantha jumped in, her voice calm but firm. "We need to think about the bigger picture here," Samantha said, her eyes locking with Lena's. "Our brand is about providing a certain level of service, a certain standard. We can't just throw that out the window for the sake of being trendy." Lena's frustration boiled over. "I'm not throwing anything out the window. I'm trying to create something that feels like the future, something people can connect with." She glanced around the table, searching for support. But everyone else was quiet, eyes downcast. Samantha met her gaze, her expression unreadable. "This isn't just about making a statement. It's about practicality. This isn't a runway show, it's a business." The words stung, and for the first time, Lena wasn't sure what to say. She had always prided herself on challenging the status quo. But now, standing in front of the team, she wondered if she was pushing too hard. The vision she had was slowly being chipped away, piece by piece, and it was starting to feel like she was losing control of the very thing that had brought her here in the first place: her creativity. As the meeting wrapped up, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that she was being suffocated. She walked back to her office, her mind racing. She needed a win. She needed something that would prove she was right, that her vision could work in the real world, that the industry didn't have to be bound by outdated norms. But with Samantha hovering over every decision, it felt like an impossible fight. That night, Lena stayed late in the office, sketching new designs, reworking the old ones, trying to find a way to make her ideas more palatable to the corporate world, while still maintaining her edge. She refused to compromise, but the doubts were starting to cloud her mind. The weight of the expectations, both from the airline and from her followers, felt heavier than ever. It wasn't just the designs that were making her anxious, it was the sense that she was walking a fine line between being true to herself and fitting into a system that seemed determined to keep her boxed in. Lena had fought so hard to get here. She wasn't about to let anyone take that away from her, not even Samantha. But as she stared at her sketches in the dim light of her office, Lena realized that this fight wasn't just about clothes. It was about her future. It was about proving to the world that she belonged in this industry, on her own terms. The breakthrough came in an unexpected way. A week after the tense meeting, Lena was called into an impromptu one-on-one with Rachel, the head of HR. Lena's stomach tightened as she walked into the conference room, unsure of what to expect. Rachel had always been friendly and encouraging, but lately, Lena had noticed a distance in her demeanor. Had the executives started losing faith in her ideas? Rachel greeted her with a warm smile, but there was something different in her eyes. "Lena," she began, taking a seat across from her, "we've been looking over your designs again, and we think we need to have a conversation about the direction we're heading in." Lena's pulse quickened. "Is everything okay?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Rachel took a deep breath. "We're just concerned about the balance between innovation and tradition. As you know, we're a global airline, and there are a lot of passengers who still expect a certain level of professionalism in the uniforms. We want to make sure we don't alienate them." Lena felt the familiar frustration rising. This again. "But that's exactly what I'm trying to do. We can't keep catering to the same people who want things to stay the same. The world is changing, and the airline needs to reflect that." Rachel nodded but didn't immediately respond. She seemed hesitant, like she was choosing her words carefully. "I agree with your vision, Lena. But the board isn't convinced. They're pushing back hard against the idea of uniforms that are too casual. They fear it'll come off as unprofessional." Lena clenched her jaw. She had been so close to bringing about real change, and now it was slipping away. "So what am I supposed to do? Water everything down just to please them?" Rachel's expression softened. "We're not saying you have to compromise entirely, but I think you might need to meet them halfway. Find a way to keep the essence of what you've created, but tone it down a little, make it a bit more refined." Lena felt a surge of anger. Refined. It sounded so empty, so corporate. She had worked too hard to create something meaningful to let it be diluted. But as Rachel continued, explaining how the company had invested a significant amount in the new designs, Lena knew there was more at play here than just creative differences. This was about power, politics, and money. Just as Lena was about to speak up, Rachel paused and looked at her, a small glint of something unreadable in her eyes. "There's one more thing," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Samantha has been pushing for some changes to your designs. She's very particular about how the final product will be received by passengers. I just want you to know it's not just coming from us, it's her vision too." The words hit like a ton of bricks. Samantha. Lena's stomach churned. Samantha wasn't just pushing for practicality. She was trying to take over the vision, to steer it in a direction Lena couldn't stomach. All those quiet disagreements, all those subtle shifts in tone. Lena had been right. Samantha had been trying to take control the entire time. Lena took a deep breath, her mind racing. This wasn't just a design battle anymore. It was a power struggle. And if she didn't act fast, she might lose everything. "Thanks for the heads up, Rachel," Lena said, her voice cool and measured. "I'll make sure to take your feedback into account." But as she left the room, Lena knew the fight was far from over. The game had changed, and now she had to figure out how to reclaim her vision before it was completely hijacked by the very person who had once humiliated her. The following days felt like a battle in a war Lena didn't fully understand. The higher-ups at the airline were growing increasingly divided over her designs, and Samantha's influence was starting to feel more like a shadow hanging over everything. The subtle undermining, the quiet opposition, it had all been leading to this moment. Lena wasn't just fighting for her creative vision anymore. She was fighting for her place in the industry, the one she'd worked so hard to carve out for herself. And that was a fight she wasn't ready to lose. After her meeting with Rachel, Lena knew she couldn't just sit back and let the executives and Samantha reshape her work into something bland and safe. She wasn't here to play it safe. She had a message, a vision that could revolutionize the airline industry. It was her time to take a stand, no matter what it cost her. But even as the tension between Lena and Samantha grew, there was a strange sense of inevitability about it all. Every day, the meetings became more contentious, the discussions longer, and the air more electric with unspoken conflict. One afternoon, as Lena sat in a meeting with the design team, Samantha's cold, calculating gaze was fixed on her like a hawk. Lena felt the weight of her eyes as she presented a new iteration of the uniform, a more streamlined design, still pushing the envelope but with enough compromise to make it more acceptable. She had made concessions, trying to balance her vision with the reality of the corporate world, but it wasn't enough, not for Samantha. After Lena finished speaking, there was a long, uncomfortable silence in the room. The executives were once again caught in the middle, unsure of how to navigate the two competing forces. The bold, forward-thinking designs Lena was championing, and the more conservative, traditional vision that Samantha was quietly imposing. Finally, Samantha spoke, her voice calm but firm. I still don't see how these designs will work across all levels of our service. We need something that represents both professionalism and comfort. These look too casual." Lena clenched her jaw but kept her voice even. "Samantha, this is the future. It's about inclusivity, about giving people something that represents who they are. This isn't just about looking professional. It's about feeling confident no matter who you are or where you're flying to." Samantha's expression didn't change, but Lena could see the flicker of irritation in her eyes. "I understand what you're trying to do, Lena, but you need to remember something. This is a global airline. We serve people from all walks of life, and we can't just cater to a small group of people who want to stand out. We need to cater to everyone." Lena's fingers gripped the edge of the table as she tried to keep her emotions in check. It was the same argument, the same catering to everyone rhetoric that had once tried to stifle her creativity. And she was done with it. "I'm not trying to cater to a small group of people, Samantha. I'm trying to create something that speaks to everyone, but in a way that makes them feel seen. We've been stuck in the past for too long." The tension in the room thickened. The executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one said anything. The silence stretched out until finally, Rachel cleared her throat, attempting to diffuse the situation. Okay, let's take a step back. I think we can all agree that we want the same thing here, a design that works for the airline, for the passengers, and for our team." But it wasn't working. The meeting had become a tug of war. The executives were stuck in the middle, trying to appease both sides, but it was clear that Lena and Samantha were at an impasse. As the meeting wrapped up, Lena felt the familiar anger bubbling inside her. The compromises, the meetings, the back and forth. It was all starting to feel like a dead end. She knew what she wanted. She knew what needed to be done. But every time she made progress, Samantha was right there, trying to pull it back in line. Lena walked back to her office, her mind racing. She couldn't do this anymore. She couldn't keep fighting to push the same designs, only for them to be watered down again and again. She needed a change, something big, something that would shake things up in a way that couldn't be undone. The next morning, Lena woke up early, her mind already made up. She wasn't going to back down. If the airline wanted her designs to be less bold, less forward-thinking, then maybe it was time for her to take her vision elsewhere. She had options now. She had a reputation, a following, and she wasn't about to let one person, or even an entire corporation, stop her from achieving what she knew was possible. She'd been playing by their rules long enough, but now it was time to rewrite the game. That day, Lena walked into the office with a newfound sense of determination. She knew what she had to do. By the end of the week, Lena had made up her mind. The feeling of suffocation, the constant back and forth, the endless compromises, she couldn't stand it anymore. The vision she had was being suffocated, and there was no way to move forward with the kind of change she wanted under these conditions. She had been patient. She had fought for her ideas, tried to meet halfway. But now, it was clear. She needed to make a choice, and as much as it pained her, she knew it was time to walk away. Lena scheduled a meeting with Rachel and the executives. As she sat across from them in the polished, cold conference room, she could feel her heart racing. This was the moment when she would either commit to the corporate world that was trying to change her or take the leap into something entirely new. Rachel was the first to speak, her tone careful. "Lena, we've all been really impressed with your work so far. But I think we need to have a real conversation about how we're going to move forward with the designs. We know you've had some strong feelings about the direction we've been heading in, and we just want to make sure we're all on the same page." Lena took a deep breath, her hands steady on the table. "I appreciate the opportunity, Rachel, but after careful consideration, I've decided that I'm going to step away from the project." The room fell silent. Rachel blinked, clearly taken aback. "Step away? But we've all been working so hard on this, and you've made such a big impact. Lena held up a hand, cutting her off. "I know, and I've appreciated all the support, but the truth is, I've realized that my vision doesn't align with what you want for the airline. I can't keep pushing for something that doesn't feel right. I want to make an impact, but I can't do that here." Rachel's face softened. but she didn't argue. "So you're leaving the project?" "Yes," Lena said firmly. "I'm going to continue with my own projects. I'll find a way to create the change I want to see, but it won't be here." The weight of her decision hung in the air, but there was a strange sense of relief in Lena's chest. She wasn't giving up on her dreams. She was choosing to take control of her own future. As she walked out of the meeting, Lena felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. The corporate world wasn't ready for the change she wanted to bring. But that didn't mean she had to stay confined by it. Her path was now clear. It was time to build something new, something entirely her own. Lena's decision to walk away from the project sent shockwaves through the airline's corporate structure. Within hours, whispers began circulating through the office. Some were surprised. Others, particularly those who had been rooting for her vision from the beginning, were disappointed but understanding. They saw her point. But there were others, including Samantha, who viewed Lena's exit as a personal affront, a direct challenge to everything they had worked toward. Lena spent the next few days in a haze, trying to process everything. The weight of her decision was heavy, but there was a sense of liberation in it too. For the first time in a long while, she felt free to follow her own path. The emails and phone calls from the airline executives continued to flood in, but she ignored them. She knew what they wanted: a quick resolution, a way to smooth things over and salvage the situation. But Lena wasn't interested in appeasing them anymore. It didn't take long for the story of Lena's exit to make its way to the media. Headlines ran across fashion blogs, industry news sites, and even mainstream outlets. Fashion pioneer walks away from major airline project. What's next for Lena? It was the type of attention she'd dreamed of, but it wasn't the way she had planned for it to happen. Still, the buzz was undeniable. Lena had made a statement, and now the world was watching, but there was also a darker side to this newfound spotlight. Lena began receiving messages, some supportive, others harshly critical. Social media was divided. Some praised her for standing up for her vision and refusing to compromise, while others accused her of being unprofessional, of walking away when things didn't go her way. The debate raged on, but Lena didn't care. She knew why she had made the choice. The world didn't have to understand it. As for Samantha, her reaction was colder than Lena had expected. Despite their brief moment of respect back at the office, Samantha didn't hesitate to publicly distance herself from Lena's decision. In an interview with the press, she spoke about how disappointed she was in Lena's exit, framing it as a failure to see the bigger picture. Samantha's words stung, especially considering the way she had subtly undermined Lena throughout the project. The same person who had once been the reason Lena had been humiliated now seemed to be capitalizing on the situation, presenting herself as the voice of reason. Samantha didn't waste time painting Lena as someone who had given up or lacked the capacity to see a project through to its end. In her mind, it was the perfect way to solidify her own position and take control of the narrative. But Lena wasn't about to let Samantha control her story. She knew the truth. Samantha's attempts to keep things traditional and tame were the real reason for the clash. Lena had been fighting for a change that the airline wasn't ready for, and it was clear that Samantha wasn't either. The media frenzy only made Lena more determined to stay true to herself. She wasn't about to let anyone, especially someone like Samantha, define her legacy. Behind the scenes, things were far from calm. In the office, Rachel and a few of the other executives had privately reached out to Lena, expressing their regret over her decision. Some even apologized for the way things had unfolded, acknowledging that they hadn't fully supported her vision from the beginning. But their apologies, though sincere, came too late. Lena knew that at the end of the day, they were just part of the system she had fought so hard to escape. As the days passed, Lena's focus shifted. She began working on her own project, putting together a team of designers and creatives who shared her vision. She started sketching new ideas, crafting a line that was all her own, something that would embody everything she had wanted to bring to the airline, but this time, without the compromises. It was a project that would be hers from the ground up, something that would reflect her true artistic spirit. She also took the time to reflect on the lessons she'd learned through this process, the importance of knowing when to walk away, when to stand your ground, and when to trust your own instincts. Lena wasn't just leaving behind a corporate project. She was leaving behind an old version of herself, the person who had tried to fit into a world that didn't understand her. And in doing so, she was giving birth to someone new, someone stronger, someone unapologetically herself. 2 months after walking away from the airline project, Lena's new venture was starting to take shape. She had named it Rebel Threads, a fashion line designed to break down barriers, challenge conventions, and cater to those who refused to be put in a box. It was a direct reflection of who Lena was and everything she believed in. Comfortable yet stylish, bold yet accessible. A celebration of individuality. Her social media presence had exploded in the wake of her departure, and now her followers were even more invested in her journey. They wanted to see what she would do next, and Lena, more than ever, was ready to show them. With the help of a small but talented team, she began to design a capsule collection that would launch her brand in style. Each piece was carefully crafted with attention to detail, from gender-neutral silhouettes to fabrics that prioritized comfort without sacrificing fashion. It wasn't just about clothes, it was about a lifestyle, a mindset. The idea that you could look good, feel good, and express yourself, no matter who you were. Lena also started reaching out to influencers and creative partners who aligned with her message. She wanted Rebel Threads to be more than just a clothing line. She wanted it to be a movement. She wanted people to see her brand as a reflection of the world she dreamed of, one where self-expression wasn't just allowed, it was celebrated. As the brand began to take off, Lena found herself facing a new set of challenges. Now, she wasn't just fighting for her designs to be seen. She was building a business from the ground up. There were investors to meet with, legal paperwork to sign, and marketing strategies to devise. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like an opportunity. The world was opening up to her in ways she hadn't imagined before, and she was ready to seize it. In the midst of all this, Lena received a call that would change everything. It was an invitation. A major fashion retailer had seen her work and wanted to partner with Rebel Threads for a collaboration. It was the kind of opportunity she had always dreamed of, a chance to take her vision mainstream, to show the world that fashion could be both groundbreaking and accessible. Lena sat back in her chair, staring at her phone in disbelief. This was it, the moment she had worked for, the moment she had risked everything for. She had stepped away from the safety of a corporate environment, and now she was about to build something entirely her own, something that would disrupt the fashion industry and set a new standard for what it meant to be stylish, comfortable, and true to yourself. It wasn't just a new beginning, it was the beginning of a revolution, and Lena was at the helm. The buzz surrounding Rebel Threads was undeniable. Lena's decision to strike out on her own, to leave behind the corporate world and its suffocating norms, had positioned her as a bold, daring innovator. As the days passed, her brand began to take on a life of its own. Rebel Threads wasn't just a collection of clothes. It was an anthem for those who refused to conform, for those who wanted to wear their personality on their sleeves, literally and figuratively. The collaboration with the major fashion retailer, Futura Styles, was the catalyst for everything. When Lena had first received the call, she had been skeptical. It seemed almost too good to be true. A partnership with such a well-established name in fashion felt like a dream, one that she had worked for but never thought she'd achieve so soon. But Futura Styles wasn't interested in just any designer. They were interested in Lena because they saw the same thing she saw: a gap in the market, a void where fashion and individuality could meet on equal terms. In the first meeting, Lena felt like she was on unfamiliar ground. She'd been used to working in a more rigid corporate environment, but this was different. The people at Futura were young, energetic, and enthusiastic. They didn't just talk about selling clothes, they talked about creating experiences, sparking conversations, and breaking boundaries. It was a far cry from the boardroom discussions she had endured in the airline industry, where everything had to be safe, practical, and profitable. Here, they were asking questions she hadn't been asked in years. What does this collection mean to you? What kind of legacy do you want to leave? For the first time in a long while, Lena felt like she was in the right room. The collaboration was announced with a flash of excitement in the fashion world. Rebel Threads by Lena, in partnership with Futura Styles, was a blend of bold, gender-fluid silhouettes and high-end streetwear aesthetics. The collection was set to drop in select cities, and pre-orders flooded in almost immediately. Lena's social media exploded. Her followers, many of whom had been with her since the early days of her career, rallied behind her once again. They didn't just want to buy the clothes, they wanted to be a part of the movement. It was about more than fashion. It was about belonging. The release day arrived and the excitement was palpable. Lena walked into the launch event, her nerves buzzing. It was her first time seeing her designs displayed in a major retail setting, and the reality of it all hit her harder than she expected. But it wasn't just the clothes she was presenting, it was her message. She wanted people to feel empowered by what they wore. She wanted them to know that their identity, no matter how unique or unconventional, was something worth celebrating. The event was a huge success. The press coverage was overwhelming, with major fashion magazines writing glowing reviews about the collection. Journalists marveled at the boldness of the designs, the way they challenged the norms of fashion while remaining accessible. One particularly touching review called the collection a wardrobe for revolutionaries, those who believe that the future of fashion lies in the freedom of expression. Lena's heart swelled with pride as she read through the reviews. She had done it. She had proven that her vision wasn't just a pipe dream. It was something people wanted, something they needed. The sales figures exceeded even her own expectations, and before long, Rebel Threads had carved out a space in the fashion world. But it wasn't just about the sales. The most rewarding part of the whole experience was seeing the way people connected with the designs. On social media, fans began posting photos of themselves wearing the pieces, tagging Rebel Threads with hashtags like "Yo, be your own rebel" and "Fashion without limits." The photos weren't just of people in clothes, they were of people in their clothes, expressing their individuality, their culture, their identity. One post, in particular, stood out to Lena. It was a picture of a young woman standing in front of a mural in a bustling city, wearing one of Lena's jackets. The woman was smiling, eyes bright with confidence, as if the jacket had unlocked a part of her she hadn't known existed. The caption read, "I never knew clothing could make me feel like I could take on the world. Thank you, Lena, for helping me find my power." Lena stared at the photo for a long time, a tear slipping down her cheek. This was why she had done it. This was why she had walked away from the corporate world, from the expectations that had tried to force her into a mold she didn't fit. She wasn't just creating clothes. She was creating a movement that made people feel seen, heard, and celebrated. The first triumph was not just in the financial success or the media coverage, it was in the way people had embraced what she had created. Rebel Threads was more than a brand now. It was a statement, and it was just the beginning. As Rebel Threads gained momentum, Lena quickly realized that this was no longer just about fashion. The impact of the brand began to reach beyond the clothes themselves, creating a cultural shift that was hard to ignore. People weren't just buying items from Rebel Threads, they were buying into a philosophy. And with that shift came new challenges. Lena was no longer just designing. She was leading a movement, one that could change the landscape of fashion forever. With success came scrutiny. Everyone had an opinion about Rebel Threads, from the critics who still believed fashion should be about tradition and elegance, to the young influencers who saw Lena as the future of the industry. Some applauded her for being bold and inclusive, while others criticized her designs for being too radical or too unconventional. But the real challenge came when major fashion houses, some of the most prestigious names in the industry, started taking notice. It wasn't just about the money anymore. Rebel Threads was stirring something in the fashion world that could no longer be ignored. The bigger players in the industry were beginning to feel threatened, and some of them started reaching out to Lena, one of the largest luxury fashion conglomerates, Celebra Fashion Group, contacted her with an offer. They wanted to collaborate on a high-end collection for their most exclusive clientele. It was the kind of opportunity every designer dreamed of, an offer to catapult Rebel Threads into the realm of elite luxury fashion. At first, the offer was flattering. It seemed like the logical next step, the way forward. But as Lena stared at the email late one night, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a business deal. This was the moment where she would have to decide what Rebel Threads really stood for. Was it about fame, money, and recognition? Or was it about staying true to the people who had supported her from the beginning, the ones who believed in the mission of fashion for all, not just the elite? Lena knew that taking this offer could mean access to a whole new level of success, but she also knew it could compromise everything she had built. The question wasn't about whether she could handle the deal. It was about whether she could keep her integrity intact in the face of such overwhelming temptation. The tipping point had arrived. The offer from Celebra Fashion Group wasn't just a business opportunity, it was a test. For weeks, Lena couldn't stop thinking about it. On one hand, it was the dream every designer aspired to. The chance to work with one of the most prestigious fashion houses in the world, to see her designs alongside some of the most iconic names in the industry, it was tempting. It was everything she had ever imagined for Rebel Threads. But there was a nagging voice inside her, a voice that reminded her why she had started this journey in the first place. Rebel Threads wasn't just about creating beautiful clothes, it was about breaking down barriers and challenging a system that prioritized exclusivity over inclusivity. It was about empowering people to express themselves freely and authentically. Partnering with a luxury brand like Celebra, with its rich history of catering only to the elite, seemed to go against everything Rebel Threads stood for. Lena sat alone in her studio late one night, a cup of coffee cooling by her side as she stared at the contract on her laptop. The figures were staggering, and the potential exposure was unparalleled. Why not take the opportunity, she asked herself. Why not use the success of the collaboration to further the brand, to bring the message of individuality and freedom to a larger audience? But deep down, she knew the truth. If she took this offer, she would be compromising her very foundation. Rebel Threads wasn't meant to be a brand for the wealthy elite. It was meant to be a voice for the everyday person, for the rebels who didn't fit into the boxes society tried to put them in. Celebra Fashion Group represented the very establishment she had spent years trying to challenge. The more Lena thought about it, the more she realized that the opportunity wasn't just about what she could gain, it was about what she could lose. If I sell out now, she thought, will I still be the same person? Will Rebel Threads still be the same? In the end, Lena knew what she had to do. She couldn't let herself be swayed by fame or fortune. Rebel Threads had started as a mission, a rebellion against the norms of fashion, and that mission hadn't changed. She wasn't going to compromise for the sake of a few extra zeros on a paycheck or a momentary boost in prestige. The next day, Lena sent a response to Celebra. It was polite, but firm. She thanked them for the offer, acknowledging the incredible opportunity it represented, but explained that Rebel Threads was a brand built on principles that couldn't be compromised. She had no interest in collaborating with a brand that stood for exclusivity, when what she wanted was to create fashion for all. It wasn't an easy decision, but as Lena hit send, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. She knew she had made the right choice. Rebel Threads was not about compromising for a bigger paycheck. It was about creating a community, a movement that defied the rules and rejected the idea that fashion should be reserved for a select few. The road ahead would be harder, more uncertain, but it was also real. It was hers. Months passed, and Lena's decision to stay true to her mission began to pay off. The fashion world had taken notice of her stance. Rebel Threads had become more than just a brand. It had become a symbol of resistance, of staying true to yourself no matter what. The rejection of Celebra's offer only amplified her reputation as a designer with integrity, a designer who refused to be bought. Lena's next steps were even bolder. She launched a global campaign aimed at dismantling the notion of fashion as a luxury commodity. Instead, she focused on showcasing everyday people from all walks of life: teachers, construction workers, artists, and activists, all wearing Rebel Threads. The campaign was a direct challenge to the fashion world's obsession with exclusivity, and it went viral. The message was clear. Fashion wasn't just for the rich or the famous. Fashion was for everyone. The impact was immediate. Rebel Threads became a sensation, not just for its designs, but for its ideals. People from all over the world began embracing the idea that fashion could be both affordable and meaningful. It was about culture, expression, and individuality. It wasn't about trends. It was about staying true to who you were, even if the world tried to tell you otherwise. Lena's success wasn't just about financial gain, although that was undoubtedly part of it. She had created something that resonated with people on a deeper level. She had built a brand that was anchored in authenticity, and in a world that often felt fake and commercialized, people were hungry for that kind of truth. One afternoon, as Lena stood in the middle of a pop-up shop in New York, watching a crowd of people try on Rebel Threads for the first time, she felt a deep sense of pride. This was what she had been working toward. This was her legacy. Not the accolades, not the fame, but the impact she was making on the people who wore her designs. She wasn't just creating clothes, she was creating a movement. She had sparked a revolution in the fashion world, one that was about more than just what you wore. It was about who you were. A young woman approached Lena, wearing one of the first jackets from Rebel Threads. She smiled shyly and handed Lena a note. The message was simple, but it brought tears to Lena's eyes. "You made me believe that I could be myself. Thank you." It was moments like this that made everything worth it. All the struggles, the setbacks, the doubts, they had led her to this point. She had created something that would live beyond her, something that would continue to inspire and empower others for years to come. Lena had found her place in the world, and more than that, she had created a space for others to do the same. Rebel Threads wasn't just a brand, it was a testament to the power of staying true to yourself, no matter how hard the world tries to tell you otherwise. And as Lena looked out at the crowd, watching people walk by in her designs, she knew that her journey was far from over. It was only just beginning. Years had passed since Lena first walked away from that airline project, and Rebel Threads had become more than just a brand. It had become a cultural shift, a symbol of independence, creativity, and authenticity. The world of fashion had changed, and Lena had been at the heart of it. From the first uncertain steps to now, her journey had been one of relentless self-discovery, rejection of the status quo, and unwavering commitment to her vision. Lena stood on the rooftop of her office building one evening, looking out over the city skyline. It had been a long road, filled with struggles, setbacks, and challenges. But now, as she gazed out at the sprawling city, she could feel the weight of her work, her legacy, taking root. Rebel Threads wasn't just about clothes anymore. It had become a movement, a voice for the marginalized, the misfits, and the dreamers. The fashion world had changed in response to her message. Where once the industry was dominated by exclusivity, Lena's designs had blurred the lines. Major designers had begun incorporating elements of inclusivity, sustainability, and individuality into their collections. While she had never set out to change the world of fashion, it had been impossible for it to ignore the impact Rebel Threads had made. Lena had created a new standard, a standard where self-expression was valued over conformity, and where anyone, regardless of their background or status, could find their place. As Lena walked through the headquarters of Rebel Threads, she saw the signs of her impact everywhere: Posters from past campaigns lined the walls. Pictures of diverse individuals, people of all shapes, sizes, and walks of life wearing her clothes. She'd created a brand that felt like a family, a community of people who shared the same values and passion for living authentically. The most recent collection had been her boldest yet, a partnership with a nonprofit organization focused on environmental sustainability. For the first time, Rebel Threads was branching out into eco-friendly fashion, ensuring that every piece was made with materials that were both sustainable and stylish. Lena had always believed that fashion didn't have to come at the cost of the planet, and now her brand was setting the example for others in the industry to follow. Her team had grown, and so had her influence. The young designers who had once looked to her as a trailblazer now worked alongside her, helping shape the future of the brand. Rebel Threads had become a platform for emerging voices, a space where creativity and individuality were nurtured and celebrated. Lena was no longer the lone rebel in the fashion world. She was the leader of a movement that was reshaping the industry, and her vision was stronger than ever. One day, Lena received a letter from a young woman named Mia. The letter was handwritten on a piece of recycled paper, and it spoke about how Rebel Threads had changed her life. Mia had once felt invisible in the fashion world, struggling to find clothes that felt true to who she was. When she discovered Rebel Threads, it gave her the confidence to embrace her individuality, to wear clothes that reflected her identity. Mia's words echoed in Lena's mind long after she finished reading the letter. "You didn't just design clothes," the letter said. "You made me believe that I could be myself, that I didn't have to change who I was to fit in. You helped me find my voice." Lena sat back in her chair, the weight of the letter settling in. This was why she had done it all. This was why she had fought so hard, why she had walked away from opportunities that could have secured her financial future, why she had never compromised on her vision. The fashion industry had tried to box her in, to limit her, but she had proven that it was possible to carve out a space where creativity, authenticity, and self-expression were the true currency. She smiled, feeling an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. There would always be more to do, more ways to expand the brand and push the boundaries of fashion. But in this moment, Lena knew that she had done what she set out to do. She had not only built a successful brand, but a legacy that would inspire future generations to come. Rebel Threads was proof that with vision, courage, and a refusal to settle, anything was possible. As Lena looked out the window once more, she thought about the journey, the humiliation, the rejection, the risks, the triumphs. She had come full circle. She had built something from nothing, something that would outlast her. Rebel Threads wasn't just a brand, it was a testament to the power of authenticity and the courage to stand up for what you believe in. And as she stood there, watching the sun set over the city she had fought so hard to shape, Lena knew that the journey wasn't over. It had only just begun.